we'll try and soldier on. Okay, I made some notes so that I can talk today. All right, I guess I'm here to talk about, we're here to talk about writing. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Why not? Because I'm often not sure.
Jim, you're in here and they'll tell you what you need to say, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. What am I supposed to talk about? Who's going to see Thor? I know, it's an easy room, right?
You're looking red.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like yeah. MarchCon?
You want to look like Chris Hemsworth?
What's that?
You want to look like Chris Hemsworth?
Oh, no, that skinny guy? No way. But anyway, so we're here to talk about writing, and specifically I wanted to talk about protagonists and antagonists today, which is not a talk that I've ever given before, so, you know, you're my practice audience, so bear with me. Yeah, okay, you people are way too enthusiastic. I don't know if I'm going to be able to deal with this. So, I'm just going to get comfortable and sit up here and do this. All right. I don't know if any of you guys, if you've heard any of my talks before, or the ones that have been online about writing. And one of the things that I always say is really important to know, especially as an aspiring writer. One of the things you got to know as an aspiring writer is you got to know about story questions. A story question is a pretty simple device that helps you focus your story and what you're going to be writing about. And the story question it's very simple. It works like this: when your protagonist encounters a situation that has something that somehow has changed the status quo, he sets forth to write it. He sets forth to do whatever it is he needs to do to set things right. But will he succeed when your antagonist gets in his way? And if you cannot break your story down, and again, this is as an aspiring writer, if you cannot break your story down into that 2-sentence summary, you're probably writing a story that's going to be a little bit too complex for your skills to handle as you get started. Really, one of the most important things that you can do in writing a story, probably the most important thing, is clarity of your plot, of your goals, of the focus of your story. You've got to be able to do that, or you won't be able to convey what you're trying to convey to your audience. So if you can't break your story down into those 2 sentences, you need to work with it until you can. Now, handily, those 2 sentences also give you your protagonist and your antagonist, your 2 characters that are going to be embodying what your story is. That's really all your protagonist is your protagonist is the avatar of the first part of your story question. The story question is an implied question that every plot asks, and that's what we're dealing with. And your antagonist is the avatar of the second part of the story question. So, let me check my notes here. They're extensive.
Could you repeat those 2 sentences again at the beginning?
Yes. Okay. When something happens that changes the status quo, your protagonist sets out to do whatever it is that he needs to do to set things right. Okay, so when droids arrive with word of a captive princess, Luke Skywalker sets out to rescue her. Okay? But will he succeed when Darth Vader and the entire Imperial Navy gets in his way? Okay? That's the story question of Star Wars. And so he's got to go out and do that. It's all about rescue the princess, and then you got to blow up the Death Star at the end. But that's just sort of follow through on rescuing the princess, because it doesn't do much good if you rescue her and then let the planet she's standing on get blown up. So,
Overachiever.
yeah, exactly. That's the problem with overachievers. They wind up in the Imperial Navy. Anyway. So that's the basic story question. When Frodo learns that the ring he inherited from his uncle Bilbo is actually the one ring that if recovered by the forces of darkness will destroy the world, he sets out to destroy it. But will he succeed when the ring race and everyone else gets in his way?
It's
oh,
only
and then
broken down in 3 sentences. Oh my God.
yeah, 2 sentences. And really, all the greatest stories, you can break them down that way. So, work with that. I mean, it kind of, especially as an aspiring writer, embrace that. There is power in simplicity, and just because it's simple does not mean it's easy. Don't ever confuse simple and easy. Lifting an engine block out of a car is simple. Anyway, so let's see. We covered the story question, right? Okay. So when you're getting to your protagonist, the first thing you got to figure out, many times in a story, is you got to figure out who is my protagonist going to be. And a lot of times you'll be writing a story and you'll be realizing you got some character that is really is more interesting and more engaging than your protagonist. And did you pick the right person for your protagonist, etc. Here's the real simple answer to who is the protagonist of your story. Whoever's got the most to lose. Whoever's going to hurt the most, that's your protagonist. Okay, whoever's got the most on the line. So when you're building your protagonist, you wonder, okay, well, how do you build the central character? Hey, what are you doing? You're late. You're walking in this room late. I've already gotten started. Now you've disrupted my flow.
You know what? Deal with it.
Oh, this is how I get treated by my beta readers.
I can take your place.
See?
Promise.
See?
There's in your place. Well, I have no
I'll
idea what
bet.
you're talking about.
I'll buy dinner.
So, but when you're, he's almost done now. He graduates in
Dr.
spring.
Butcher?
Oh, no, he's not doing that now. Now he wants to be a writer. So. I think he figured out how much work doctors have to do. And then he looked at his father, and I'm like, yeah, well, if you want to write, son, you're going to have to write a little more.
So he doesn't want to be.
I don't know. I guess we'll have to work with him on that. But in any case, how do you build your protagonist? How do you make him, make it a character that people are going to get behind and are going to like and are going to say, ooh, I want to make you a New York Times bestselling author. Because that's really what you want your audience to say. You want your audience to be, wow, I want to go spend time with that guy. I want to see who they are. If he was, I want to tell my friends about this character. So that they can enjoy this story too. And the way you do that, the first thing you have to do that, the thing that gets in the way of most people being able to do that when they start off writing is that they don't have the kind of clarity and focus that you need to create in order to let your reader understand, get that picture of your character in his head. Writing is the original virtual reality, and once you understand that, that's when you start trying to learn to work with writing so that you're creating this virtual reality for people so that they're seeing the story happen in their head, not reading it on a page. Not everybody agrees with that. Okay, there are a lot of people who look very differently at writing. They're in love with the music of language, and that's cool, but it's not what I want to do. That's somebody else's thing, so I'll let Rothfuss talk about that sometime. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. I mean, Guy Gavriel Kay is here, one of the most lyrical writers around. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a mental movie in somebody's head. So this is the process I use to do it. So other people's process is still awesome, and your process is going to be different than mine. But I'm going to share mine with you because I don't know anybody else's. So the first thing you have to do is when you're creating this protagonist character. The most common mistake that aspiring writers make is that they are too inhibited, they are too conservative, they're too cautious with their character. There's got to be a certain amount of exaggeration involved with your protagonist. I did not believe this for a long, long time. My writing teacher told me this for years, and I ignored her because I had a degree in English literature. and with an emphasis in creative writing, whereas she had merely published 40 novels. So I knew what I was talking about. And so finally, one semester, I decided that I was going to prove her wrong. And I decided I was going to prove her wrong by doing everything she told me to. I was going to be her good little writing monkey and follow all her little rules and do her little worksheets and do her little wooden construction things. And that was how I was going to show her. So I said, okay, exaggerated protagonist. All right, I got you. Okay, this guy is okay. He's going to be he's like NBA basketball tall. He lips off to absolutely everybody to the point where it almost cripples him socially. You know, he's a complete computer nerd, except instead of computers, it's magic. Let's see, he wears a big black flappy leather coat that's almost like a cloak. And he also totes a gun around his pocket. He's got a big old wizard staff that he carries everywhere with him. And he advertises in the phone book that he's a wizard. And that's where I started building this character. Let me show you. Let me show you how wrong you are.
15 novels later.
Yeah. Almost 15. I'm working on it. Okay. I've got 2 chapters left. I stopped to come here. Okay. Yeah. I feel sorry for the betas because I kind of get on a roll the last few chapters, and those are the ones that you really want to just cliffhang the hell out of them. Chapters, so that you make sure the reader does not stop turning pages. When they get to the end. And the betas have got to wait like 3, 4, 5 days between cliffhangers. So that's why I call the beta reading list the asylum. Because close to the end of the book, that's what people are. They're a little bit resolved at this point. They're just like, yeah, another cliffhanger, right? Of course, another cliffhanger. Anyway.
Death threats have happened along the way.
On the beta list?
No, you from the beta readers.
Oh, from the beta readers? Not so many. If they kill me, they won't get to find out. These people know what's up. Death threats from kind of random people, that's different. Torture threats. I really don't take those too seriously. Torture threats I get all the time. And that's fair. I torture all of you. People are like, you just enjoy torturing your characters, don't you? I'm like, no, I enjoy torturing my readers. The characters are just how I get to them. Okay, so you have to engage in a certain amount of exaggeration with these protagonists. If you don't, you're going to have characters that seem a little bit flat, that seem a little bit uninteresting. Almost all characters are going to have 1 or 2 of these exaggerated traits at the very least. If you think about all the best characters, practically the first thing we see Han Solo do is blow a guy away under a table. And that's sort of, and that's going to lead me into my next point, or into a point a little bit later on, which is the importance of introduction. But first of all, we're going to talk about your protagonist. Your protagonist, you got to decide who he is. And the most important thing you can have about your protagonist is the absolute most important trait. And this is important not just for the reader or the audience, but for you as a writer. Your protagonist has to be driven to get his goal. He's absolutely got to be focused. Remember on the goal in the story question, your protagonist sets out to set things right. That's his story goal. Whatever it is that his story goal is, that's what he's going after. Okay? So the absolute most important trait you can have in that protagonist is that he is motivated and driven to get his goal. You can create all kinds of great motivations for him, but you really need in this character somebody who is not going to be stopped by anything. Because then you can throw all this stuff in his way and make him keep going. And that's one of the that's where conflict comes from. That's where story comes from. However, okay, that said, protagonists can embrace any number of other qualities. They can be as heroic as Superman. They can be as neurotic as Mr. Monk. But as long as they are driven to not stop, then there's an inherent quality to perseverance that is going to carry them through a story. So really, perseverance is something that is, if there's anything you've got to have in a protagonist, that's it. Other than that, the really important thing that you do is that you set up your tags and traits for your protagonist correctly. Traits are character points, pieces of his character that belong to him and to him completely. Okay, so if I'm writing Harry Dresden, the Dresden Files, one of his traits is that he is a wise ass. It's one of the great big words that sticks to his character. Okay, and that means that other characters do not get to be as much of a wise ass as frequently as Harry Dresden ever. They still get to lip off occasionally, but Harry Dresden is King Wise Ass, and there's no, there's no competition for that within his own books because they're his books. If you've got somebody, if I've got somebody who is, a character who is noble, it's like, okay, Michael is one of the noble characters.
I love him.
I say that, and you go, that's Michael. That's who he is. That's one of his traits. If I've got a character who is dedicated to the law. It's Murphy, exactly. And these are the big traits that get associated with that character. So you're going to have a primary characteristic that you're going to be associating with with each character. Big characters can have more than one big characteristic. Harry is stubborn and a wise ass, for example. And then he's got some other sub traits that go on below that. He is a professional. He's an expert at what he does. But and then the more minor a character gets, the fewer of these tags and traits that get assigned to them. But every character should have some core thing that they're embodying, and it's called a trait, and it's a behind-the-scenes thing that you, as a writer, know that you don't just go, this character defends the law, to the reader. You show the character doing that. That's what the character is doing in their actions. Tags are words that get associated with a character. Specific words that you use primarily in association with that character all the way through the book. This is a psychological trick, and it's subtle, and a lot of people don't notice it. But what you do is when I talk about a short, cute blonde, everyone knows I'm talking about Murphy within the context of the Dresden Files.
Tiny but fierce.
Yeah, tiny but fierce.
That's how I describe my mom.
That's actually I gave my twin nieces Indian names, and one of them is named loves to give presents, and the other one is named Tiny but Fierce. She is a bitty thing and ferocious. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Sorry, I get sidetracked. But these tag words are words that you pick and you associate with your character that you use primarily in association with that character, and you don't use them in other places as much as possible. So that when I write about someone who is pale and dark-haired and beautiful, then you can immediately go, that's Thomas, or it might be Lara, one of the other white court vampires or raids. But it immediately creates that picture in the reader's head of who it is. And the reader never stops and goes, oh, those are words that are associated with Thomas. They just go, oh, that picture came into my head. And that's what you're doing. We're creating a movie in people's head. So pick some words that go with your characters. The bigger the character is, the more words can be associated with them, but you don't want to do too many. And just I suggest when you put a character together, you write a profile up of them. You put, these are their main traits. These are their tag words. Other tags you can associate with them are props, for example. If I talk about a character who's toting a sword, then more than likely I'm talking about one of the Knights of the Cross, because that's their tag is those swords. That's the tag that goes along with them. Similarly, if the character is toting a lightsaber, if he's got a blaster, you know who we're talking about. Because you say blaster, and tons of people carry blasters, but only one of them had it as a trait, or as a tag, and that was Han Solo. Because he was the one who actually talked about blasters. Anyway, so the traits are the words that you show, that you associate with them. They're important. It's extremely powerful. It's a very subtle psychological device. It's not subtle when you talk about it, but right now you and I are the magicians talking shop about how the trick works, and this is how the trick works. It doesn't look that way from the audience when the audience is reading it. So, there we go. Tags and traits. Simple. Go be bestsellers.
Just like
Go for it.
And then we talk about, and we're going to do questions in a minute. And then the last thing we talk about, that the absolutely vital thing for your character is character introduction. How you introduce your character, and not just in his first appearance, but every time he has a first appearance in a given book, is going to shape the audience. First impressions count, right? Everybody knows that. It's doubly true for characters. If there's anything wrong with the first book of the Dresden Files, is that Harry has kind of a weakness. Because I didn't know very much about what I was doing. I was 25. What did I know at the time? Especially about writing. Basically, I was still trying to prove how wrong my teacher was. Showed her.
What kind
Yeah,
of
not
books does
hardly.
she write?
But anyway, so when you're introducing your character, there's a number of ways that you can introduce a character. Sometimes you can introduce a character by showing the character's environment. Think about how you got introduced to Doc Brown in Back to the Future books. Because the first thing you did was pan around his laboratory and see all these things happening and all these gizmos going off and so on, and Marty blowing himself across the room on Doc's speaker system. That's how you got introduced to Doc Brown, was through the environment he was in, which is, that's one way to introduce a character. You can come up with any number of them, and you might have to be creative to get that done. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. I think it's overrated. But the absolute strongest way to introduce a character is through characteristic entry action. Characteristic entry action, all capitalized words, is the strongest way to introduce the character, to show them being who they are. Okay, the first time you see Princess Leia, she's blowing a stormtrooper away. Okay, that pretty much shows us who Princess Leia is. You see her slipping around, being sneaky, and killing a stormtrooper. Cool. Okay, we know who that character is from now on. She's a warrior. She's a defiant warrior the whole way.
The building was on fire.
Yeah, the building was on fire, and it wasn't my fault. That's a good introduction. He's running down the hallway with a box full of puppies and a bunch of demon monkeys chasing him, throwing flaming poo at him. That's an introduction for that. That's a more worthwhile introduction for a character. And really, if there's ever a movie, that's what I kind of want the movie to start there.
I love the one.
That's a good place for the movie.
I love the introduction in Turncoat when what's his name? Morgan
comes
just
in and
falls
stumbles
over.
across the-
He's like, "Oh, come on!"
Save me! Oh God! Anyway, so but there you see character introductions, very, very important, and this goes all the way down the line for sub characters, but it's most important for your hero and your villain. When your villain shows up, the villain gets a good intro. If anything, the villain should get a stronger intro than the hero did, because that makes him that much more impressive and cool. Darth Vader just kind of swooping in through that door, over the dead bodies of all these troopers, with all these hideous stormtroopers snapping to attention around him and everything, and then picking the guy up like that. It's like, okay, Darth Large in charge. All right, I get it. That shows you who that character is. Darth Vader, perhaps the greatest villain of the 20th century, in fiction. I think real life did him better a couple of times, but they didn't have as good an introduction. Anyway, and then on the flip side, when you create your villain, always remember this when you're writing your villain probably doesn't know he's the villain. The villain thinks that he is the protagonist of his story. So you build the villain exactly the same way you build your protagonist. You assign him the same kind of traits. You figure out what tags are going to be there for your villain. You figure out his introduction. You make sure to do it to build him an exaggeration. He gets as much weight when you're designing him as the protagonist does. And if he doesn't, you need to beat him up because he's too weak. And that's where you need to focus on when you're building your antagonist. Remember, your antagonist has a goal, and his goal is running exactly counter to whatever your protagonist is. Your antagonist has to be just as driven, has to have just as much perseverance. If you're writing, you get a little bit more limitation in that if you're writing a first-person story, like from Dresden's viewpoint, because Dresden only gets to see where he himself is, and he tends to be a little hard on protagonists. So there's not a lot of Dresden protagonist Dresden antagonist interaction time. But when you're writing other stories, multiple viewpoint stories, you get into like the Codex Alera. You go to your villains, and you've got to build your villains' world just as thoroughly as you do your heroes. And your villains have got to be people who have a good reason for doing what they're doing. Even if they're insane reasons, they have to make sense from the villain's perspective, or you just can't buy it. You just can't buy into it. Let's see, tags, traits, primary characteristic, exaggeration, introduction. That's all I've got. And that's how you write awesome stories. The stuff that I shared with you just now is simple. Okay, it's simple, it's not complicated, but it isn't easy. It takes a lot of practice. You've got to, it can be a very humbling experience, so far in my experience at least. But once you've got it, and it often feels very wooden and clunky when you're first starting to try and work with it. But at this point, I don't even think about that stuff now. I just build my stuff, and I've got a framework that I build it on. It's like any other craftsman. Once he gets his shop set up and knows where his tools are, you don't really have to think about it. You just kind of grab the screwdriver. There it is, and you're already busy working on the next part of whatever project you're doing. So. Even if it does feel a little bit strained and clunky when you first start using it, so did your typewriter. So just kind of practice with it a while, and eventually it becomes easier. So, typewriter, keyboard, most of it. I actually had to learn on a typewriter.
Yeah.
First idea.
Those are antiques.
Yes. They were machines that people used a long time ago, like cotton gins.
What's a cotton gin?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so questions?
The way that you were talking about that as the antagonist, protagonist, kind of also calls it like playing a role-playing game. You're literally writing out the character like that. Is that kind of the same mindset of, here's my character, here's their stats?
It can be useful, although really, for me, it was the other way around. My role-playing games got to be so much better after I improved my writing skills. Because I started cliffhanging things at the end of every session and everything, and we're stopping here. We're stopping here. Yes, be here next week, and we will rejoin our party of brave adventurers. And then at the beginning of every role-playing game, I'll be like, last week in EOS. And I'll go over, because that's the name of the fantasy world I run, and I'm eventually going to write an epic fantasy epic set in the world of EOS, which stands for every other Saturday, because that's when the game Go tell everybody. Or they won't take me seriously. But yeah, storytelling is storytelling, and it's just a question of what tools do you have to tell the story with. If you're a filmmaker, you have a different set of tools, and so you're working in a different palette than if you're a writer, than if you're a graphic novelist, than if you're running a role-playing game. But storytelling's all the same. It's all the same bits, and you can take stuff that I've told you today and apply it across the spectrum. So.
I apologize. That is the Dresden system, the game.
The Dresden role-playing game? They decided to base the role-playing game off of my writing process. Yeah, I don't know what convinced them to do that, but yeah, if you go read the Dresden Files role-playing game, it will teach you how to write, a novel. What's that?
It ain't broke.
Yeah. Well, apparently that was what Fred decided anyway. But yeah.
Any tips on reintroducing characters, like from book 1 or book 2 or something like that? It's like he's back.
Okay, every time you have your character show up on the screen, whether you're the first time is the strongest one, but every other time they show up on screen after that, you got to remind people how you introduced them the first time, so that their head will immediately go back to that same picture. So.
Butters.
Butters. Butters is always he's got the scrubs, he's got the shock of hair. I try and have him show up in the scrubs at least the first time on screen as much as possible, because that's the image that got created of him in people's head. So when he shows up again, you got to hit on some of those original, and you do that by hitting the tags. So the next time Butter shows up in a scene, we get another mention of the hair, the glasses, the nerd, and there he is again. When he shows up in another book, he gets introduced not the same way, because people complain about that after a while, but you introduce them in a similar way, and then every time he shows up again in that book, you hit the same tags that you hit when he first showed up. And you don't like to have to hit all of them, but you pound on one or two of them so people go, oh, right, that guy. You're kind of creating these mental associations. It's all about that. As long as you can hit one or two of those words that you pick, one or two tags, you'll be able to do it.
When Morty comes back and he rips into the corpse thing, is phenomenal, because you think he's dead, and then when you reintroduced him, it was exactly what you just described. Because he's like, what, I don't know what kind of villain school you went to, but you just left a freaking ectomancer with a pool of braids.
Yeah, how often does Morty get the chance to be badass? It's like, I can't believe you just left this machine gun right here.
It was so cool, because they did exactly that. You know, he's a little ineffectual, and all of a sudden now it's like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
you picked him up and you put him down in an environment where he has more protagonist traits than he would normally have, and that's what made him good.
How far in advance do you recommend, I guess, plotting out events? So like Stephen Bruss wrote this really great book, Terrain in Hell, and he was like halfway through it when he realized, oh crap, this is who's gonna win. Like he didn't plan the ending, and in fact surprised himself by the ending. Like, I know it maybe is a little different when you've got huge story arcs across, 15 novels, but
how far ahead do you plan out events?
Yeah, like how.
Yeah, well, in my case, I turned in the first few chapters of Stormfront, and she said, my teacher read them and says, you did it. And I said, what? She says, you did it. You'll sell this. She says, I don't know if it'll be the first thing you sell, but this is of saleable quality. You'll sell it. And I said, oh. And so she says, I make sure you bring me an outline for the rest of it next week, when we meet next week. I'm like, okay. And so the next week, I brought her an outline for the next 20 novels. And it was 20 story questions that I had written. And I brought it and talked to her about it and showed it all her, and we went through. And I'm like, so it's like 20 books. Do you think that's okay? And she goes, if you can get 20 novels sold, I think you'll be doing fine. Was sort of her response. Very, very dry sense of humor. It was Debbie Chester. But anyway, I did that. When I sit down to write a book, I know the beginning of the book where I want to start it. I know the opening scene. I know the finale of the book. I know probably a big explodey scene in the middle that I want to do, and probably I've got a couple of one-liners that I want to have Harry drop along the way.
Right.
And that's what I know when I get started, and then I build it scene by scene as I go. I outlined a lot more thoroughly when I was first going, because it was much more helpful to me as a writer. Now, like I said, the process is automatic enough to me that I know, okay, these are the elements. When I set them in motion in this direction, I'm going to get the kind of story I want. Let's go. And then I just get started. But especially early on, you are so much better off doing a bit of outlining. That doesn't work like that for everybody. But purely from a craft standpoint, I want to do this in a fashion where people will expect me to deliver it in a fairly timely fashion standpoint, the outlining is extremely useful.
Do you ever have characters that you originally thought would be what I would call throwaway character, or somebody who may or may not ever show up again, who stand there basically on the sideline and say, "You're not throwing me away. What is wrong with you?"
The problem is they don't do it on the sideline; they do it on the page. And yeah, Butters is the example character of that, because I needed to have an Emmy, and I just watched The Prophecy, the movie with Christopher Walken, and I wanted a mouthy, funny Emmy.
Right.
So I built Butters as just kind of I built him on the scene, as I was writing him, and then I'm like, this character's too cool. I can't do it. He's hilarious. So, and he didn't much get to show up in the next book, but in the one after that, You know, it's like I've got to have a sidekick. Who do I have as a, you know, I got to pick Harry's sidekick for this book. Who's it going to be? He's going to be up against a bunch of necromancers. Who's the sidekick going to be? The medical examiner, obviously.
I think what
So Butters winds up, you know, sidekicking Harry through most of this adventure. And,
On a
yeah, I pick like
dinosaur.
one character to sidekick Dresden in every book. You know? And a lot of times I've gone to the readers and said, hey, who do you want to see as a sidekick in the next book? And I'll do a poll on the website. And okay, so be it. I will add this character. Because ultimately you're writing for the audience. And you should. There are some people that say, don't take your audience into account. There are some writers who are like that. Who say, don't care about the audience, just write it for you. And I'm like, okay.
Aren't they the ones buying it?
Good luck with that, because I'm an artist, and artists have always needed patrons. It's just that before they only had to please 1 or 2 people, whereas now you got to please, you know, 30 or
Several
40,000 at
million.
least. And you know, so it's a good idea to kind of bear your audience in mind. To
One word, mortgage.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't have a muse, I have a mortgage. Yes.
When you talk about exaggerating the character traits of the protagonist and antagonist, I wondered, is that why you had the interactions in Skin Game and Death Mask between Deidre and Nicodemus? Like, you know, he's a badass with a sword and the shadow and the point, and oh yeah, he does disgusting stuff with his daughter. Was that to exaggerate?
Yeah, that's over the top. That's how you do it. Plus, we get into the psychology of that a little bit more in the next one. I know, right? And that's the idea. He's the bad guy, you know. Yeah, but the thing is, and Garrett will verify this because he's read part of the next book. Nicodemus and Deirdre don't think they're the villains. They think they're the only ones who know what's going on, and that everybody else is mostly just stupid. And that's the way a lot of villains think. Let me go back here first.
Thanks. When you were doing more plotting, was there a particular method that you used? I mean, I've heard the snowflake method.
The snowflake method.
It was something where basically you start with like 1 or 2 sentences, and then you make that into paragraphs, and you make that expanded out.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you what I did. At the risk of